subtext, are you working on a reaction video or anything like that, or?
Not a reaction. You know, I kind of don't really. I really need to stop lying to myself. That's right, there was a new FF7 Rebirth trailer, and once again, I walked away from it a bit speechless. See this? It's my brain right after seeing FF7 Rebirth trailers. But now that I've hoovered them back up and into my head, I do have quite a lot of things to say about this trailer, and I can't wait. But as a heads up, two things. First, the obligatory spoiler warning for everything related to Final Fantasy VII, from the remake to the original to the compilation. And secondly, just to start out, I want to say what I was most excited about with that trailer was that I was just so glad that despite them showing so many moments, I came away still feeling incredibly confused. That doesn't mean I don't have theories, but it means that they're all very loose. They've done such a good job at keeping us in the dark, even as they keep showing us more and more, and I'm really happy about that. If I'm being hypersensitive, I could say that it's theoretically disappointing to see some parts of the gold saucer, or this, or especially this, as these are all pretty big individual moments, and the last one in particular is a hard confirmation that we'll get some kind of version of that fateful scene. But the beauty of the Rebirth project is that they have set us up to always be thinking that it can turn out differently. Even if the biggest changes are mostly walled off into the Zack side of the story, there are still major hints of changes in the main journey. From the Summer Games Fest trailer with Tifa openly talking about her doubts over Cloud's memories, to Cloud talking to someone, probably Tifa, about knowing strange things he shouldn't know, presumably his visions of the future as teased in the remake, to Tifa saying things that feel like they're ripped straight out of the livestream sequence. And it feels far too early for any of that to be happening, but it does sound like it. Because of all that, all of these moments that feel somewhat spoiler-coded are still incredibly mysterious. In fact, the thing I was thinking about most on Thursday night was a Nomura quote from an interview in September with a Korean site where he said, quote, "The question of who dies and who lives cannot be easily answered, but even if you happen to get spoiled, it's enough to make you go, what? So what happens?" As expected, I hope everyone will confirm this with their own eyes. That is exactly how I felt after watching that trailer for the first time. And because I'm full of questions and you're full of questions, I think it's time to speculate on some answers. As always, I really try to focus my videos on interesting takes I haven't seen elsewhere so that this video doesn't feel like it's just regurgitating stuff you've probably heard elsewhere. Though I will hat tip to a couple of things along the way that I have heard and found particularly interesting. And with that context out of the way, let's get into it.
Psych!
That's because before we do, I want to set expectations for you all. I don't have a lot of time to edit this video, so I may move fairly quickly through each of these points so I can get this video done in the time frame that I have. And while there are some good thoughts, in my opinion, within this video, the thoughts I have here are not as big as some of my biggest theories. Still good stuff, but it's a lot more likely that they'll make you go, oh, instead of, oh my god. I mean, there is one thing at the end that may make you think that, but that's for all of you to decide. First, and honestly, this may be the most important discovery in this video, when all is said and done and we've all played Rebirth and seen exactly how wrong I am, but something very important happened in the opening seconds of the Rebirth trailer. And no, it wasn't Zack openly talking about getting shot, it was this. Do you see it? This. You can see Bugenhagen's ball. Boom! The Bugen ball is real. He's still maybe a little too tall, but it's okay because we have La Bola de Bugenhagen. This trilogy is in good hands. They get it, I feel great. Incidentally, bolas is the word for balls in Spanish, while balas is the word for bullets, the things Zack says he can feel every single one of. Coincidence? Yeah, definitely. But let's actually rewind to the start of the trailer and talk about that weird Zack dialogue. In fact, let's listen to it real quick.
I'm feeling every single bullet.
Yep, that's still weird. Did he die? Is he remembering his death? Is he alive but having visions of how his death should have happened, just like Cloud has weird visions of events that haven't happened? Those are all good questions. But you want to know what makes the line even weirder? Check out this direct translation by Shinra Archaeology Department's Turquoise Hammer.
確かに風が吹いてたな。
That's not only very different, it's very weird. What could that possibly mean? Well, it might have to do with these guys, especially after seeing this really cool editing trick by Sleepeasy on Twitter. Now imagine that dialogue going along with that imagery.
確かに風が吹いてたな。
It is possible that Zack is remembering the feeling of the whispers whipping around him, causing a gust of wind as it jumps in front of the bullets. Especially if he can't see them, he would talk about the sensation of them. And it might actually give him some thematic connection to Biggs, who we see in the trailer openly wondering about why he survived when the rest of Avalanche didn't. Biggs seems to be having some survivor's guilt, and maybe Zack is too, which is an interesting reversal of what Cloud experienced throughout the second half of FF7 and all the way through into Advent Children. Maybe that is one reason why they chose the name Rebirth, considering that it also has a dual meaning in Japanese, where the katakana for rebirth also reads as reverse. Zack may be experiencing the reverse of what Cloud went through all throughout the compilation. After all, it really looks like he's going through a journey where he will be having to deal with feeling like he lost Cloud and Aerith, kind of like how Cloud had to go through a journey in the original game where he felt like he lost Aerith and Zack. The Gold Saucer play was a big part of this trailer, and there was something about it I found really interesting: its title. The play is officially called Loveless, and press materials refer to it as a quote musical stage play. Even more interesting is that, based on what we've seen, it seems almost nothing like the Loveless poem Genesis couldn't stop repeating in Crisis Core. That is perfect. It means I can finally see a version of Loveless closer to what was in my imagination in 1997. Basically, something that isn't completely insufferable, and so it should be a good time. The lore guy in me is curious how much it'll differ from the overarching themes and plot of the Loveless we know from Crisis Core, and I hope it's quite a bit. Also, there's kind of an interesting meta inside a meta at work here, since the FF7 remake is a reimagining of the original FF7, but quite different in a lot of ways, and seemingly this is a reimagining of Loveless, and it will technically be Loveless, but hopefully also different from the Loveless we know. Another common thing I've heard people mention is the idea of Genesis being there in the crowd because it's the Loveless play. I mean, maybe. I personally think that would be a very cheesy way to bring Genesis in. You know what? This is not even a theory, I'm just gonna say it. I don't want that. Maybe they do it and it's brilliant somehow, but I am not into that at all. Don't let that title fool you. I actually think this can be a brilliant decision. A lot of people have been talking about Cid no longer sounding like the Cid we know from the original game, where he was a brash asshole who verbally abused anyone with a pair of ears. And sure, that's true, he does sound weird, but it's 2 lines of dialogue, people, relax. In fact, my first thought after the trailer ended was that Cid was probably trying to pull some kind of scam on the party. It's the only way the scene makes any real sense to Cid's character. I've heard people say that maybe Cid now has future memories like Aerith or Red 13, but I don't buy that. I think this is about truly establishing and exploring Cid's character. And before we get into that, I do want to have a conversation about Cid's character because I think people have overlooked some things. In almost every conversation about Cid's portrayal in Rebirth, people have been wondering one thing: will he still be a complete asshat? Will he curse? Will he smoke? Will he yell at Shira? Will he tell us to drink our goddamn tea? And I get it, he's a fun character. It's ballsy to write that guy that way, despite being a quote-unquote good guy. I've even joked that they better write Cid like a jerk. I've said I hope he verbally abuses Cloud. But that is not what is at the core of Cid's character. This was especially clear to me as I've been replaying the original game in the lead up to Rebirth. And yes, I do plan to post highlights of my playthrough here on YouTube in January. Cid's character arc isn't from being an ass to being a nice guy. It's about being a self-serving jerk who only thinks about his dreams and how he's been wronged by everyone, and transforms into a selfless leader who eventually takes over for the party at one point in the story when a new leader is needed. That part of the OG FF7 always felt odd, and I think it's because While they always meant to convey the idea of Cid growing from a selfish asshole to a selfless leader, the language he used was so startling that it overshadowed everything else. Which brings me to why this portrayal of Cid might be even better than in the original game. Sure, we haven't heard him being a jerk, but that'll probably happen. But more importantly, we may be seeing the beginnings of his character being centered more around that core character arc rather than just his toxic personality. And to bring this point home, I want to shout out two people who I think may have cracked it. The first is FinalFan TV, who hosted a Hypecast last week to talk all about the Rebirth trailer and brought little old me on as a guest. And during that show, he mentioned this.
I feel like there's something. So if I'm going to try and flip this to make sense to me and not be out of character for Cid, I think there's something in it for him where I feel like he's like, let me help you. I want to help. Like, you know, he's not really being super truthful. He's just really wants whatever they have. Whereas maybe they're like, I got the keys to the Highwind. Oh, please let me help you. I would love to, you know, like, let me, I want to help Aerith, please. Come on. Where I feel like that might be what's going on, where it's out of context what we're seeing in the trailer. And I think maybe he's still that Cid that we know.
The second is Highwind Mark II, aka @HighwindMKII on Twitter if you want to follow him. He posted this theory which focused on the idea that Cid may be being nicer to the party as a ruse so he can turn them into Shinra. As he notes, Cid in the original game was employed by Shinra, but ultimately screwed by them when they killed the space program. Meanwhile, he's been hoping against hope that he can convince the company to start it back up again. In the demo footage we've seen from the Junon Undercity, we know that there is a bounty on the party, so it's possible that Cid is motivated to turn them into Shinra in order to revive the space program as a reward. It's a very Lando Calrissian move when you think about it, and we know how much these developers love Star Wars. I think that's a pretty damn solid theory, and I would likely be disappointed if it were something else. I really hope it's in that realm. And I also hope that we continue to get swept off our feet by how cool Aerith is by having her call out Cid's shit in that moment. Remember, Aerith is a pretty street smart slum girl by now who practically masterminded everything that we did in Wall Market. So I'm hoping she sees right through his ruse, and maybe even gets him angry by doing so. We might then see that characteristic attitude we've come to expect. Did you notice the whispers behind Aerith in that scene? I'm sure you did. They're hard to miss and everyone's been talking about them. At the end of Remake, it sure seems like defeating the Whispers allowed Sephiroth to absorb them, and in turn give him the ability to control them. In fact, it seems like he was even able to control some of them before all the shenanigans in the Singularity. So yeah, all that's to say that I'm pretty sure they are not on our side. In fact, it would seem that they're there to stop us from changing her fate. Like Sephiroth is going to create a barrier stopping us from stopping him. And even worse, he's going to make us watch and say to ourselves, well, I guess there's no point in wasting our time worrying about fate if we can't change it. No, wait, I'm sorry. I got mixed up. We won't say that. Cloud will. At some point in this game, that is hard confirmed. But why would he say that? Why would he say something like there's no point in wasting our time worrying about fate if we can't change it? Unless it's about an attempt to change fate that ultimately failed. That would be really hard to deal with. And it would be really juicy. Actually, before I talk about what doesn't make sense, let me talk about what does. In my last video, I broke down a potential timeline of events in the Zack side of the story. My belief was that things would play out like this. Zack getting into Midgar, having this moment with Kyrie while dirty, then meeting up with Elmira, cleaning himself up, and eventually going back out into the world with Cloud in tow. I do think that it is possible, however, that one more scene occurs before Zack goes out on his journey with Cloud. If you look back at the Zack scene from the end of the Oeth DLC, he's cleaned up, but Cloud is nowhere to be found. He's not propped up on the side of the church, he's nowhere. So there are two things we know about the scene with certainty. He's clean instead of dirty, so it couldn't have happened when he was traveling with Cloud looking like this, and it doesn't seem like he has Cloud anywhere with him when he's clean, so it couldn't be him after this. I would assume then that this scene at the church happens while Cloud is being kept safe in Elmira's house, as we saw in the trailer. But there's something even more important about the Zack scenes that has me really confused. Beyond the weirdness of I can feel every bullet, what is especially weird about this timeline and why it makes no sense is Biggs. According to the documented timeline of events, Zack's last stand happens in September of that year, and it happens just outside of Midgar. It's established in the OG that Cloud, by himself and barely conscious, gets to Midgar by the beginning of December at the latest, because that's when you go on the bombing missions and all of that. If that's true, then why is it that Zack, who is technically in better shape than Cloud at the end of Crisis Core, seems to reach Midgar after Sector 7 Platefall, an event that happens so much later that Cloud, in the OG events, has already had enough time to meet Tifa, shake off his Mako poisoning, and do 2 whole missions with Avalanche? Is really weird from a timing perspective. But maybe Zack's timeline, his reality, is so jacked up that the timing of those events, and even those events themselves, happen in a different way at a different time. Maybe it's just very, very different. One thing that I immediately thought of after the trailer was the idea of the timelines being linked. It actually turns out that quite a few people have come to similar conclusions, and it does seem to make some sense. The basic theory goes that characters can only exist in one timeline at a time. Cloud and Aerith are alive in the main remake timeline, the one with the Beagle version of Stamp, but unconscious in Zack's timeline, the one with the Terrier version of Stamp. Meanwhile, Biggs is alive in Zack's Terrier-verse, but presumably dead in our main Beagle-verse. That would be an easy way to make sense of the line of dialogue from Marlene in the trailer.
When she wakes up, a staring man is gonna kill her.
Maybe Marlene means that when Aerith dies in our timeline, she wakes up in Zack's. The only problem, though, is Marlene. Well, Marlene, Elmira, and even Kyrie. We see them in Zack's world, but they are most definitely alive in Cloud's world as well. That means that they break the logic. If they exist in both timelines, then it can't just be a situation of only being able to exist in one at a time. In short, I have no idea. The simplest answer is that they are linked somehow, and sometimes the simplest explanations really are the answer. RIP, my single timeline theory. But that existence of Marlene and other characters in both does make this one a bit tough to crack. It's possible that maybe characters can decide to move from one to the other if they're in tune enough with the planet, so maybe it means Aerith, before dying, hits the escape hatch and slips into her body in Zack's timeline, technically surviving. Maybe after the worlds merge, then the characters who are only alive in one timeline survive, because it'll be a seamless transfer of their souls compared to characters who exist in both. Hence the big question of the world will survive, but will you? I don't know. It gets really weird, and I really don't know. And I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's a live stream. Maybe they're dead. But it can't just be that clean because, again, the Marlene problem, right? The Marlene Elmira problem. Why could they be alive in the real world as we know it, but also alive if Zack's world is technically just a live stream for dead souls? They're not dead. So I don't know. Going back to how much FF7 references Star Wars, and even the developers themselves talking about Empire Strikes Back, we got another one of those kinds of moments in the latest FF7 Rebirth trailer.
It is your destiny. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
Sorry, I played the wrong clip. I meant one of these.
Cloud, lend me your strength. Let us defy destiny together. Never.
Except this time, it wasn't Sephiroth. It was coming from Aerith.
Please, I'm begging you, lend me your strength.
I must say, I find it very interesting that Aerith is using the identical words that Sephiroth used at the Edge of Creation. I'm sure there are much more level-headed theories that can come from this, including that both of these characters are very important to the fate of the planet and would both conceivably need Cloud's strength to do what they need to do. But you know what? It's the middle of December, I'm tired, I have 2 days to edit this video before doing some holiday travel, so I'm gonna get a little nutty. Consider it my holiday gift to you all. And it all has to do with this Aerith line, lend me your strength. It's not just similar to Sephiroth's line of dialogue, it is exactly Sephiroth's line of dialogue. And do you remember what Sephiroth said in the Summer Games Fest trailer?
They say she's a monster, that she can peer inside you, into the very depths of your soul.
that she can become those you hate, those you fear, those you love.
What if that line isn't coming from Aerith? What if it's coming from Sephiroth pretending to be Aerith with the powers of Jenova in order to trick Cloud into letting him take control of Cloud's body? After all, the scene at the edge of creation sure makes it seem like Cloud has to accept Sephiroth's offer. So what if Sephiroth tricks him into it? After all, it wouldn't be the first time Sephiroth pretended to be a party member, if you remember this scene from the Whirlwind Maze in the original. And if he did it, not just in some side story with a secondary character like in the original game, but instead did it at one of the most pivotal points in the main story in a way that's directed to deceive our main character, that would be really messed up. And I would love it. And that's it. There was one more big idea I was playing with, but I honestly couldn't get it solid enough to fit into this video. I might talk about it one day if I really figure it out. Those bigger ideas simply just take time to get right, and I didn't want to half-ass it. So if I do make a video about it, it'll probably be one that is fully dedicated to just that idea. So in the meantime, like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things, and I'll talk to you next time.